Hi, Guy. Tonight we find ourselves on a famed lantern street in Kanazawa, the air thick with the scent of paper lanterns and the promise of rain. You probably won't survive the night if you don't keep an eye out for falling roof tiles. Just a friendly warning. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let us know where in the world you are and what time it is. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the mud, the lanterns casting eerie shadows that dance and twist with every gust of wind. The light flickers, painting the narrow street in alternating hues of orange and deep, inky black. The rain hasn't started yet, but the humidity hangs heavy, clinging to your skin like a damp cloth. Listen closely. You can hear the rhythmic squeak of geta sandals on the wet cobblestones, punctuated by the distant, melancholic strains of a shakuhachi flute. Kondo Isami, our pearl diver, adjusts his oiled paper umbrella, the faint light filtering through it casting a warm glow on his weathered face. He squints, his eyes scanning the street ahead, his hand instinctively reaching up to adjust the brim of his woven straw hat. Pearl diving, you see, was a significant occupation in ancient Japan, providing pearls not just for adornment, but also as a valuable commodity for trade. Imagine the skill and bravery it took to plunge into the cold depths of the ocean, searching for these iridescent treasures. Now here's where things get a little interesting. A French theory, whispered among scholars and historians, suggests that some pearl divers used crocodile dung sunscreen. Yes, you heard that right. Crocodile dung. Historians still argue whether this concoction was actually effective in protecting against the harsh sun, or just fragrant. Imagine the aroma wafting across the ocean surface. Let's just say, it probably wasn't winning any awards for most pleasant seaside scent. The wind howls like a hungry ghost, suddenly picking up strength and whipping the paper lanterns into a frenzy. They swing wildly, their light casting chaotic, dancing shadows that stretch and contort along the slick, cobbled streets. The sound of the wind intensifies, morphing into a low, mournful wail that seems to penetrate right through you. Kondo glances up at the sky, his expression darkening. The bruised purple clouds swirling above are a clear sign. Bad weather is brewing. Suddenly, a figure emerges from the swirling mist and flickering lantern light. You see Tae Mizuno hurrying towards you, her kimono clutched tightly around her, her face pale with worry. She stumbles slightly on the uneven stones, her voice strained as she calls out, "Kondo-san, have you heard?" News travels fast on the lantern street, carried on the wind and whispered from neighbor to neighbor. It seems a typhoon is battering the outer provinces, its fury unleashed upon the unsuspecting coastline. This brings to mind another interesting tidbit. During such storms, when communication was crucial, wealthy samurai sometimes employed a rather unique method of message delivery: trained falcons. Imagine these magnificent birds soaring through the tempestuous skies, carrying vital missives clutched in their talons, a testament to both human ingenuity and the incredible bond between man and animal. Kondo frowns, his hand tightening on the handle of his umbrella. His family, you see, lives on the coast, a small fishing village nestled precariously close to the raging sea. A wave of concern washes over his face, etched deep into the lines of worry already present. He doesn't need to voice his fears. They are palpable in the tense set of his shoulders and the worried furrow of his brow. "The winds are strong," Tae says, her voice barely audible above the rising wind. "They say it's the worst in a generation." The weight of her words hangs heavy in the air, a stark reminder of the power of nature and the vulnerability of those who live at its mercy. Typhoons, as history tells us, were a recurring threat in ancient Japan, often causing widespread damage, displacement, and untold hardship. Entire villages could be swept away in the blink of an eye, leaving behind only devastation and heartbreak. You think of your own flimsy apartment, the thin wooden walls and paper windows offering little protection against the fury of a typhoon, the image of the wind tearing through your meager possessions, the rain pouring in through the cracks, flashes through your mind. This night, you realize, could get interesting. The air crackles with anticipation, a mixture of fear and excitement. The storm is coming, and there's nothing you can do but brace yourself and wait for the inevitable. The flickering lanterns cast long, dancing shadows, transforming the familiar street into a scene of almost otherworldly beauty and menace. The stage is set. The players are in place, and the drama is about to unfold. The wind howled, a ravenous beast clawing at the lanterns strung across the street. A few ripped free, their flames extinguished in an instant, swallowed by the growing darkness. The rain began as a hesitant drizzle, a soft whisper against the tiled roofs, but quickly escalated into a torrential downpour, a deluge that hammered the streets and turned the narrow alleyways into rushing streams. I huddled deeper under the eaves of a merchant's stall, shivering despite the multiple layers of silk I wore. The dampness seeped through the fabric, clinging to my skin like a second unwelcome layer. "We should find somewhere safe," a voice said close to my ear. Kondo stood beside me, holding a large oiled paper umbrella that offered a small, precious circle of dryness. His face was etched with concern, his gaze sweeping across the increasingly chaotic street. He extended the umbrella towards me. "Tae-san, please." Grateful for the offer, I ducked under the protective arc of the umbrella. The wind tugged at its edges, threatening to turn it inside out, but Kondo held it firm. "The tea house," he said, gesturing towards a flickering light down the street. "We should be able to wait out the worst of it there." We hurried towards the tea house, the wind and rain lashing at our backs. The warm glow emanating from the paper walls beckoned us forward like a beacon in the storm. Inside, the air was thick with the aroma of steaming tea and something subtly sweet, perhaps burning incense. A handful of people huddled around low tables, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of oil lamps. They sipped their tea in silence, their expressions grim, reflecting the anxiety brought on by the raging tempest outside. "The spirits are angry," one whispered, his voice barely audible above the roar of the wind. Another nodded solemnly, clutching his teacup as if it were a lifeline. A decent cup of tea sounded like an excellent start, I thought, pushing back a stray strand of wet hair. I wondered if they practiced tasseography here, reading fortunes in the tea leaves. Historians never seemed to agree on whether that was a genuine ancient practice or just modern wishful thinking, a romantic notion projected onto the past. Perhaps I could try it later, if the opportunity arose. Kondo and Tae found a relatively dry corner near the hearth, a small brazier filled with glowing charcoal. The warmth radiating from it was a welcome relief from the chill of the storm. I watched the rain lash against the street outside, the water cascading down the rooftops and turning the street into a swirling river. Every so often, a particularly strong gust of wind would rattle the paper walls of the tea house, making them tremble precariously. "I hope my family is safe," Kondo murmured, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the brazier. He thought of his small wooden house perched on the coast, exposed to the full fury of the typhoon. Would it survive such a storm? He imagined his wife, her face lined with worry, securing the storm shutters. Thick wooden panels designed to protect the fragile paper windows from the wind and rain. He hoped they had been strong enough. He hoped the sea hadn't risen too high. These storms could be unpredictable, ferocious, and sometimes, tragically, the sea would claim homes, families, entire villages. The legends of angry sea dragons causing such tempests suddenly felt less like quaint folklore and more like a chillingly accurate description of the raw power unleashed upon them. The tea house owner, a wizened old woman with a kind smile, shuffled over to them, carrying a tray laden with steaming cups of tea. She placed them on the low table between Kondo and Tae, offering a small bow. "May this warm you," she said, her voice raspy but soothing. "Thank you," Kondo replied, accepting a cup with a grateful nod. He took a sip, the warmth spreading through him, chasing away some of the chill that had settled deep in his bones. The tea was fragrant and slightly bitter, a welcome distraction from the anxieties swirling in his mind. He glanced at Tae, noting the way she held the warm cup in her hands, her eyes fixed on the flickering flames of the brazier. He wondered what she was thinking, what worries she harbored beneath her calm exterior. He knew she was far from home, in a strange land, caught in the midst of a terrifying storm. "Tae-san," he began, hesitant at first. "I know this must be unsettling, but please, try not to worry. We will be safe here until the storm passes." She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Kondo-san," she replied softly. "Your concern is comforting." The wind continued to howl outside, the rain showing no signs of abating. The small group in the tea house huddled together, united by their shared anxiety and the hope that the storm would soon pass. The flickering flames of the brazier cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an almost hypnotic effect. The aroma of the tea, the warmth of the hearth, the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the paper walls, all combined to create a strange sense of peace amidst the chaos. It was a fragile peace, easily shattered by the next violent gust of wind or the creak of the wooden beams. But for now, it was enough. For now they were sheltered, together, waiting for the dawn. The rain intensified, pounding the tea house walls, rattling the roof tiles. I wondered if this flimsy structure would hold. I thought of duct tape. Too bad it hadn't been invented yet. An old woman near the hearth began to tell a story, her voice a low murmur against the storm's roar. "They say," she whispered, "that long ago the wind was a mischievous spirit." Her words painted a vivid picture of a time when the world was young, and the boundaries between the spirit world and the mortal realm were thin. The wind, she explained, wasn't simply air in motion, but a powerful kami, a nature spirit, capable of both great benevolence and terrible destruction. He roamed the land, sometimes a gentle breeze rustling through bamboo groves, other times a furious tempest tearing ancient trees from their roots. The old woman's tale unfolded, weaving a tapestry of ancient heroes who wrestled with the wind kami, mischievous demons who rode on its gusts, and talking animals who whispered secrets on the breeze. One story told of a young fisherman who earned the wind's favor by offering him the first catch of the day, earning calm seas and plentiful fishing for his village. Another spoke of a proud warlord who scoffed at the wind's power, only to have his fortress crumble under the onslaught of a typhoon. I shifted uncomfortably on the tatami mat, my damp clothes clinging to me. I thought of my own boring life. Maybe talking animals wouldn't be so bad. At least life wouldn't be dull. I wondered if these ancient stories originally had jokes woven into them, or if that was something added later, a way to make the tales more palatable for modern ears. Historians, I'd read somewhere, still argued the point. Kondo listened intently to the old woman's words, his usual anxiety momentarily forgotten. The lines etched on his forehead seemed to soften as he became absorbed in the narrative. Tae, huddled beside him, offered a faint smile, her eyes distant as she too was caught up in the tale. The wind roared outside, shaking the little tea house, but the old woman's voice remained steady, a comforting presence in the midst of the storm. She recounted the legend of the wind bells, explaining how their gentle chimes were believed to soothe the wind's restless spirit and ward off evil. She spoke of rituals and offerings, of prayers whispered to the wind, seeking its blessing or pleading for its mercy. It was a strange mix of reverence and fear, a testament to the power that the wind held over their lives. Some ancient Japanese, I'd read, believed telling these folk tales during storms could appease the angry spirits. Seemed like a long shot to me. One story in particular stood out. It spoke of a village nestled at the foot of a volcano. The wind, angered by their disrespect for the mountain, unleashed a devastating eruption. Only a young girl, who had always shown reverence for nature, survived. She rebuilt the village, teaching her people to live in harmony with the wind and the mountain. The old woman's tale finally ended with a moral about respecting the power of nature. A good message, I supposed, but my own inner monologue screamed, "Respect? More like hide under a very sturdy table." I thought of the intricate joinery I'd seen in some of the older temples, the way the beams were fitted together to allow for flexibility. Ancient Japanese architecture, I knew, often incorporated these flexible joints, designed to withstand earthquakes and typhoons. They understood the power of nature, all right? They respected it by building structures that could bend, not break. Outside, the wind howled, mocking the story's message of peace. The rain continued to lash against the tea house, and the roof tiles rattled precariously. The wind seemed determined to test the limits of both the tea house and the old woman's tale, a relentless force against the fragile shelter and the whispered words of tradition. The wind's fury felt personal, as if it were directly challenging the stories, the rituals, the very idea of appeasing its rage. It was a stark reminder that, despite the tales of harmony and respect, nature remained a force to be reckoned with, a power that could not be fully controlled or understood. The rain continued to fall, a relentless torrent. It hammered against the tea house roof, a constant drumming rhythm that frayed the nerves. Rivulets snaked down the paper walls, fat, glistening worms leaving dark trails in their wake. A small pool was forming near the entrance, threatening to turn the entire floor into a shallow pond. I watched it spread, a morbid fascination holding me captive. Each drop that landed seemed to whisper of the storm's growing strength, a relentless assault on the fragile structure that sheltered us. Kondo knelt on the tatami mat, his head bowed low. He held a string of smooth, dark beads in his hands, their surfaces worn smooth by years of use. He muttered words under his breath, a low murmur lost in the roar of the wind and rain. He was praying to the local kami, the spirits that inhabited this land, beseeching them for protection against the storm's fury. He thought of the small shrine, nestled amongst the cedar trees just outside the village, its bright red torii gate now likely obscured by the downpour. He envisioned the kami residing within, hoping they would hear his desperate plea. These beads, he'd once explained to me, were a family heirloom, passed down through generations of samurai. They were unlike any I'd ever seen, a deep, almost black color, with a subtle sheen. He'd confided, with a conspiratorial wink, that they were supposedly made from fossilized shark teeth. He'd also mentioned a fringe theory, whispered amongst collectors, that such beads amplified spiritual power. Historians, however, remained divided. Some argued their unique properties were purely symbolic, while others suggested the abrasive texture was beneficial for dental hygiene, leading to healthier gums and, consequently, a more confident prayer delivery. I hadn't had the heart to tell him I suspected they were just polished river stones. Right now, though, the source of their power seemed less important than the comfort they offered him. Tae knelt beside him, offering a reassuring smile, but the strain around her eyes, the slight tremor in her hand as she reached out to touch his shoulder, betrayed her fear. Her face was pale, almost as white as the paper walls themselves. I glanced nervously at those walls, so thin and seemingly fragile against the onslaught of the storm. I thought, rather uncharitably, that I'd feel a lot more reassured by concrete and steel. Still, I had to admit there was a certain beauty to the tea house, a delicate grace in its simplicity. The way the lamplight filtered through the paper, casting warm, flickering shadows, created an almost ethereal atmosphere. I tried to appreciate the aesthetic, to focus on the delicate paintings of bamboo and cherry blossoms adorning the walls, rather than the rivulets of water that threatened to wash them away. "We'll be safe here," Tae said, her voice soft but firm, but her gaze drifted towards the window, towards the raging storm outside, and I knew her thoughts were elsewhere. She was thinking of her family, of her parents and younger siblings who lived in a small village a few miles away. Their house, nestled on the edge of a rice paddy, was even more vulnerable than this tea house. Were they huddled together, fear gnawing at them as the wind howled and the rain lashed against their walls? Did they have enough food and water? Would their house survive the storm? I knew that many villages had designated shelters, usually a sturdy communal building or a temple, specifically for use during natural disasters. I hoped her family had reached one. "The kami will protect us," Kondo said, his voice echoing Tae's attempt at reassurance. He squeezed the prayer beads, his knuckles white. He looked at Tae, trying to project an aura of calm he clearly didn't feel. He wanted to believe his words, to cling to the hope they offered, but the relentless fury of the storm was eroding his faith. He'd lived through typhoons before, but this one felt different, more powerful, more malevolent. He glanced at me, a fleeting look of uncertainty in his eyes. I offered a small nod, trying to convey a confidence I didn't possess. We were all clinging to fragile threads of hope, praying that the paper walls, both literal and metaphorical, would hold against the storm's rage. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the shutters of the tea house. The rain intensified, transforming the rivulets on the walls into small waterfalls. The little pool by the entrance was now a sizable pond, spreading across the tatami mats. We huddled together, a small island of humanity in a sea of raging elements, each lost in our own private fears. The tea house creaked and groaned under the strain, a symphony of protesting wood and paper. We listened, hearts pounding, to the relentless assault, wondering how much longer this fragile sanctuary could withstand the storm's fury. We were at the mercy of the elements, our fate hanging precariously in the balance. All we could do was wait and pray. Suddenly, the tea house door burst open, letting in a blast of wind and rain. I thought, dramatic much? A figure stumbled in, soaked to the bone, his face grim. It was Minamoto Yoshitsune, a Ronin, his swords gleaming wetly. He glanced around the tea house, his eyes sharp and assessing. They swept over the mismatched collection of travelers huddled around low tables, seeking refuge from the tempest raging outside. Steam rose from their wet clothes, mingling with the fragrant aroma of tea and the subtle scent of fear. The flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows, adding to the air of unease. "Shelter from the storm," he said, his voice rough like stones grinding together. His gaze landed on Kondo, more specifically, on the diver's knife tucked into his sash. The hilt, intricately carved from bone, seemed to gleam faintly in the dim light. I knew some Ronin carried knives with hilts carved from the bones of their enemies, for casual conversation starters. It wasn't exactly dinner table etiquette, but then again, Ronin weren't exactly known for their social graces. This one, Yoshitsune, seemed the type. There was a hardness in his eyes, a weariness that spoke of battles fought and lost. Historians still argue whether Yoshitsune was a noble hero or just a really skilled mercenary. My mind raced. A good mercenary would be handy right now, especially if he came with a working boat. Our own little vessel was currently at the bottom of the ocean, thanks to the unpredictable whims of the sea. And while Kondo was a capable diver, navigating treacherous currents and avoiding hungry sharks was not exactly my forte. I noticed the Ronin's tattered clothing. The once fine silk was now ripped and mud-stained, clinging to his lean frame. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days. The sharp angles of his face were accentuated by the hollows beneath his cheekbones. Ancient Japanese society had strict social hierarchies, with samurai at the top. Even a fallen samurai, a Ronin, would normally command a certain level of respect, but this one, he looked like he'd been chewed up and spat out by fate. I wondered if this storm, this shared vulnerability, would level the playing field, at least for the night. Stripped of their usual status and comforts, everyone in the tea house was reduced to the same basic need: survival. "May I share your corner?" Yoshitsune asked, his voice barely a whisper, directed at Kondo. He gestured towards the small, relatively dry space where Kondo and I sat huddled together, sharing a pot of lukewarm tea. Kondo nodded, his expression unreadable. He was a man of few words, especially around strangers. "This storm makes strangers of us all," he said, his voice low and rumbling. He poured a cup of tea and offered it to the Ronin. I could almost feel the unspoken question hanging in the air between them, friend or foe. He hopes his words aren't prophetic. I certainly hoped they weren't. The last thing we needed was another enemy, especially one as skilled and desperate as Yoshitsune appeared to be. But there was also a flicker of hope, a desperate gamble forming in my mind. Perhaps this Ronin, this outcast, could be our unexpected savior. Perhaps, in this shared moment of vulnerability, we could forge an alliance, a temporary truce against the elements and the uncertainties that lay ahead. Yoshitsune accepted the tea with a curt nod, his fingers brushing against Kondo's as he took the cup. The small gesture was charged with an unspoken tension. He took a long sip, the hot liquid seeming to revive him slightly. He closed his eyes for a moment, savoring the warmth. "Thank you," he finally said, opening his eyes and meeting Kondo's gaze. "My name is Minamoto Yoshitsune." "Kondo Izami," Kondo replied, inclining his head slightly. He didn't offer his own hand, and Yoshitsune didn't seem to expect it. The formalities between samurai, even fallen ones, were subtle and complex. I cleared my throat, feeling a little left out of the introductions. I hesitated, unsure what name to use. My real name carried too much weight, too much baggage. "Call me Haruka," I decided, settling on a simple alias. Yoshitsune acknowledged me with a brief nod, his gaze lingering on my face for a moment before returning to Kondo. "You are divers?" he asked, his eyes flicking down to the bone-handled knife once more. Kondo nodded. "We were," he said, his voice tinged with a hint of bitterness. "Until the storm claimed our boat." Yoshitsune's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "A misfortune," he said. "Perhaps an opportunity." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. I could feel a shift in the atmosphere, a subtle change in the dynamic between us. The storm raged on outside. But within the confines of the tea house, a different kind of storm was brewing. A storm of unspoken intentions, of calculated risks and desperate hopes. The gamble had been laid on the table. Now we just had to wait and see who would fold first. The Ronin settled into the corner, the flickering firelight painting his face in shifting shades of orange and red. He held his hands out to the brazier, the steam rising from his damp clothes mingling with the smoke from the charcoal. His eyes, dark and watchful, scanned the tea house, taking in the handful of other patrons huddled against the storm. Farmers, mostly, judging by their rough-spun clothes and calloused hands. A traveling merchant, nervously clutching a small, lacquered box. And me. He lingered on me for a moment. Then his gaze shifted back to the brazier, but I noticed his hand never strayed far from the hilt of his sword. Trust, but verify. A good motto, especially in times like these. Hard to do, though, when you're stuck in a leaky tea house with a Ronin during a typhoon that felt like the gods were throwing the ocean at the islands. He wore his sword like a second skin. The scabbard was plain, practical, but I knew those blades often held intricate patterns folded within the steel, a testament to the skill of the smiths. Probably handy for deflecting raindrops, too, I thought absurdly. Not that he looked like the type to worry about a little rain. Yoshitsune leaned in, whispering something to Kondo, his words swallowed by the wind howling outside. I strained to hear, but it was no use. Kondo's face, already pale from exhaustion, drained of what little color remained. He recoiled slightly, as if struck. What did the Ronin say? It couldn't have been good. My grandmother used to say whispers carried further in storms, especially whispers about betrayal. Superstition, probably, but the unease twisting in my gut felt real enough. The thought of Yoshitsune and conspiracies sent a shiver down my spine. Historians still debated the extent of his involvement in the various plots and rebellions that plagued the era. Was he a mastermind, pulling strings from the shadows? Or was he just conveniently blamed by his enemies, a scapegoat for their own ambitions? It was hard to say. The truth, like so much else in those turbulent times, was shrouded in rumor and speculation. Tae, bless her heart, was staring at them with undisguised suspicion. She didn't trust this Ronin, not with his shifty eyes and hushed conversations. I could hardly blame her. A little paranoia was probably healthy in a situation like this. Better to be overly cautious than caught unaware. What news from the outside? Kondo asked, his voice strained, tight with a tension I couldn't quite decipher. Yoshitsune shrugged, a casual movement that seemed at odds with the gravity of the situation. Rumors of flooding, collapsed bridges, displaced villages. He delivered the news with a disturbing lack of emotion, as if reciting the price of rice. Flooding. Collapsed bridges. It painted a grim picture, a landscape ravaged by the storm's fury. Ancient Japanese infrastructure, for all its ingenuity, was always vulnerable to the raw power of nature. Earthquakes, typhoons, floods, they were a constant threat, a reminder of the precarious balance between human endeavor and the unforgiving forces of the world. I thought of my own little apartment, tucked away in a quieter part of the city, probably flooded by now. The tatami mats would be soaked, the paper screens torn. The few precious possessions I owned likely ruined. A pang of sadness, a dull ache of loss, settled in my chest. It was just stuff, I told myself. Replaceable. But it was still my stuff. My home. Kondo ran a hand through his hair, his face etched with worry. The river, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. If the levees break, he didn't need to finish the sentence. We all knew what that meant. Catastrophe. The river, swollen with rainwater, would surge through the city, sweeping away everything in its path. Homes, businesses, lives. The silence in the tea house deepened, punctuated only by the relentless drumming of the rain on the roof and the occasional crackle of the brazier. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a katana. Yoshitsune remained impassive, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the tea house walls. Kondo paced restlessly, his steps short and agitated. Tae huddled closer to the fire, her eyes darting nervously between the two men. And me, caught in the middle, trying to piece together the fragments of information, the whispers and rumors, the unspoken fears, and make sense of it all. trying to figure out what the Ronin was really doing here, trying to decide if I should trust him or run. The wind howled again, a long, mournful cry that seemed to echo the turmoil brewing inside the tea house. It felt like the calm before the storm, that pregnant pause before everything changed. And I had a sinking feeling that whatever Yoshitsune had whispered to Kondo, it was about to change everything for us all. This tea house is becoming Grand Central Station for displaced samurai, I thought as the wind howled another mournful cry and the rain hammered against the fragile wooden walls. The flimsy door rattled open, revealing another figure battling against the storm's fury. It was a man, his scholarly robes plastered to his thin frame, soaked through to the skin. He clutched a long, narrow scroll case under his arm, as if it contained the secrets of the universe. Water streamed from the brim of his wide-brimmed hat, obscuring his face until he pushed it back with a trembling hand. Matsumai Takahiro, a wandering scholar by his introduction. Ancient Japanese scholars, I knew, often traveled the countryside, immersing themselves in various disciplines, seeking knowledge wherever it could be found. I'd even read a rather fringe theory proposing that some scholars used a special ink made from squid ink, supposedly waterproof, although also, admittedly, a bit fishy. Historians still argued whether such a practice was actually practical or just stylish. I imagined the poor scholar, hunched over his scrolls in the rain, a pungent aroma of the sea wafting from his writings. It certainly painted a memorable picture. Then again, wealthy scholars sometimes traveled with entire portable libraries carried by servants. I couldn't help but think a Kindle would have saved them a lot of trouble. "May I share your fire?" Takahiro asked, his voice soft, almost lost against the roar of the storm. Kondo, ever the gracious host, even in these cramped and uncomfortable circumstances, nodded immediately. Knowledge warms better than fire, they say. He gestured towards the meager flames licking at the damp wood in the hearth. I suspected his hospitality was fueled less by philosophical musing and more by a desperate hope that the scholar knew something, anything, about typhoon prediction. Takahiro bowed slightly in gratitude and carefully unwrapped a thin, damp cloth from around his scroll case, revealing the polished wood beneath. As he did so, I caught a flicker of something in his eyes. A hidden secret, perhaps? Ancient Japanese scholarship often included esoteric disciplines like astrology and divination, after all. I briefly entertained the unsettling thought that he was about to predict the end of the world, courtesy of the approaching typhoon. That certainly wouldn't improve our current predicament. He carefully unfurled one of the scrolls, its edges fraying slightly from the damp, revealing elegant calligraphy. The script was unfamiliar to me, full of complex characters I couldn't decipher. He peered at it intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. He wasn't looking at weather patterns, I was certain of that. "The winds are strong," Takahiro murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. "They say even the spirits are seeking shelter." His words sent a shiver down my spine. Ancient Japanese mythology was rife with tales of spirits inhabiting various natural objects, from towering trees to unassuming rocks. The thought of disembodied entities fleeing the storm, seeking refuge alongside us in this tiny tea house, wasn't particularly comforting. Tae, ever pious, clasped her hands together and bowed her head. "May the kami protect us all," she whispered. The scholar seemed oblivious to her prayer, his gaze fixed on the scroll. He traced a finger over a particular symbol, a complex knot of lines and curves. I strained to see what held his attention so completely, but the flickering firelight and the strange script made it impossible to discern. He finally rolled the scroll back up with a sigh, and carefully placed it back in its protective case. He looked up at us, a strange expression on his face, a mixture of awe and apprehension. "The storm. It is not merely a storm," he said finally, his voice low and almost conspiratorial. He glanced nervously at the door, as if expecting some unseen presence to burst in. "What do you mean?" Kondo asked, his voice betraying a hint of impatience. He clearly wanted practical advice, not cryptic pronouncements. Takahiro hesitated, then leaned closer, lowering his voice even further. "The old texts, they speak of times like these, times of great upheaval, when the boundaries between worlds become thin." I exchanged a worried glance with Tae. This wasn't going where I wanted it to go. My hope that he possessed some meteorological wisdom seemed increasingly misplaced. He looked less like a scholar and more like a soothsayer. He continued, his voice barely a whisper. The winds, they carry more than just rain. They carry whispers. Whispers from the other side. Kondo shifted uncomfortably. Whispers? He repeated skeptically. Takahiro nodded, his eyes wide. Whispers of forgotten things? Things best left undisturbed. I had the distinct impression that he was enjoying this dramatic pronouncements a little too much. Perhaps being trapped in a tea house with a samurai and a priestess provided a captive audience for his esoteric pronouncements. Still, the intensity in his eyes was unsettling. The wind shrieked again, rattling the shutters and sending a draft of cold air through the room. The small fire sputtered and almost died, plunging the tea house into near darkness for a moment, before TAE quickly added more wood. The sudden shadows seemed to deepen the scholar's pronouncements, lending them an unsettling weight. What exactly were these whispers he spoke of? And why did I have a sudden, inexplicable urge to cover my ears? The tea house creaks and groans under the storm's fury. I wonder if those ancient flexible joints are really working, or if I'm about to become part of a very large Jenga game. The wind howls like a hungry demon, rattling the shutters and whistling through the gaps in the wooden walls. Rain lashes against the paper windows, blurring the outside world into a swirling gray mess. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of damp wood and brewing anxiety. Kondo shifts restlessly on his cushion, his gaze fixed on the tempestuous scene outside. He runs a hand through his thinning hair, a nervous tic he's developed since the storm began brewing. He thinks of his wife Hana, her gentle smile, and the way she always hums while mending fishing nets. And his children, little Taro, with his boundless energy, and his quiet, thoughtful daughter, Akari. He pictures them huddled in their little coastal house, the waves crashing against the shore, each surge closer than the last. The house, perched precariously on the edge of the land, had always felt vulnerable to the ocean's whims. Now, with the storm raging, that vulnerability felt like a gaping maw, threatening to swallow them whole. He remembers the village elder lighting the signal fire atop the highest hill the previous evening, a flickering warning against the approaching tempest. The deep, resonant thrum of the warning drum still echoed in his ears. He'd seen the warning fires before, heard the drums beat their ominous rhythm. But this time the wind seemed to carry a different weight, a more insistent threat. Historians, I'd read somewhere, still argue whether these early warning systems were actually effective or just loud. Did they truly give people enough time to prepare, to move to higher ground, to secure their homes? Or were they merely a theatrical display of helplessness against the inevitable wrath of nature? A dramatic soundtrack to impending disaster? The thought offers little comfort now, as the tea house groans under the onslaught of the storm. Kondo turns to Takahiro, his face etched with worry. A desperate plea shines in his eyes. Scholar-san, he says, his voice tight with anxiety, do you know anything of this storm? Will it reach the coast? I glance at Takahiro, wondering what wisdom the scholar could possibly offer in the face of such untamed fury. I remember reading about ancient beliefs, the idea that scholars, through their deep contemplation of the natural world, could predict the future by studying the patterns of falling leaves. Falling leaves? More like falling roof tiles at this point. The thought flashes through my mind, a grim counterpoint to the poetic imagery. I try to appreciate the ancient wisdom, the connection to nature, but my heart pounds against my ribs like a trapped bird, making it difficult to focus on anything but the imminent danger. Takahiro, seemingly unfazed by the raging storm, considers Kondo's question with a thoughtful frown. The storms are fickle, he says, his voice calm amidst the chaos. But the winds carry whispers of destruction. He unrolls a scroll, its aged surface crackling softly, revealing a detailed map of the region, its rivers and coastlines meticulously drawn. He traces a finger along the coastline, stopping at a cluster of small islands. They say the outer provinces are already flooded. The fishing villages, they are most at risk. Kondo's face pales, the color draining from his cheeks like sand through a sieve. He swallows hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. His family, they live in one of those outer provinces, a small fishing village clinging to the edge of the easternmost island. His silence speaks volumes, a chilling confirmation of his worst fears. The wind howls louder, as if mocking his despair. The tea house groans again, a sound that seems less like flexibility and more like a final, desperate plea before collapsing. The rain continues its relentless assault, each drop a tiny hammer blow against the fragile structure. The scent of damp wood intensifies, mingling with the metallic tang of fear. I watch Kondo, his face a mask of anguish, and I feel a pang of sympathy for him. He is caught between the fury of the storm and the gnawing uncertainty of his family's fate. He's trapped, like the rest of us, in this creaking tea house, at the mercy of the elements, waiting for the storm to decide our destiny. Takahiro studies the map, his brow furrowed in concentration. He mutters something about wind patterns and tidal currents, his words lost in the roar of the storm. He seems to be searching for a glimmer of hope, a sliver of possibility amidst the encroaching darkness. But the storm rages on, indifferent to our hopes and fears, a relentless force of nature that cares nothing for human anxieties. The atmosphere in the tea house is thick with tension, the silence broken only by the incessant wind and rain and the occasional creak of the strained timbers. We are all holding our breath, waiting, praying for the storm to pass, for the dawn to break, for some sign, any sign, that the world outside is not completely consumed by chaos. The rain lashed against the shoji screens, a relentless drumming that mirrored the frantic beat of my heart. The street outside had transformed into a churning river, debris swirling in its muddy current. I watched a stray sandal bob past, carried away by the relentless flow, and wondered, not for the first time, if I'd ever see dry land again. Dry land, sunlight, a bowl of steaming rice that wasn't flavored with the tang of fear. Such simple things felt like distant, impossible dreams. Yoshitsune, perched on the edge of the low table, glanced at Kondo. There was a strange expression in his eyes, a flicker of something that might have been hope, or perhaps just a desperate calculation. "There might be a way," he murmured, his voice barely audible above the roar of the storm. "A risky one, but—" He trailed off, leaving the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. I knew what he wasn't saying. The seas around these islands were treacherous, even in calm weather. The currents shifted without warning. The winds could change in an instant, and storms, well, storms like this one could swallow a ship whole and leave no trace. I'd heard tales from fishermen, whispered stories of ghost ships and drowned sailors, swallowed by the hungry sea. I remembered something I'd read once, about how ancient Japanese sailors navigated by the stars, by the feel of the wind, by the subtle shifts in the currents. Historians still argued whether someone like Yoshitsune, a warrior, not a sailor, could possibly have possessed such knowledge, or if he was just lucky. That would be nice right now. Lucky as in finds a working boat that isn't about to capsize in this deluge, lucky as in doesn't get swept out to sea and become fish food. "A hidden cove," Yoshitsune whispered, leaning closer to Kondo, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "Known only to smugglers and pirates." Pirates? Of course. Because escaping a flooded city in the middle of a typhoon wasn't dramatic enough. We needed pirates. I imagined them, fierce and wild, with their ragged clothes and weathered faces, their ships adorned with— what was it those old scrolls described? Flags with symbols of demons and sea monsters. Branding, I suppose. Effective branding, if the goal was to terrify your enemies into submission. My stomach churned. Pirates? Smugglers? Was this rescue mission about to become a heist? I tried to stay optimistic, to cling to the sliver of hope that Yoshitsune had offered. But my heart was sinking faster than a lead anchor. "It's a gamble," Yoshitsune admitted, his gaze meeting Kondo's. "But it's the only way to reach the coast before the storm hits full force. The main ports are already flooded. The roads impassable. This cove, it's our only chance." Kondo was silent, his face etched with worry. He stared out at the raging storm, his jaw tight. He was weighing the risks, I knew. His family's lives hung in the balance. Everything he held dear was at stake. Loyalty. Family. Those were the cornerstones of his world, the values that defined him. And now, He was being forced to choose between those values and the very real possibility of death. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with the weight of his decision. The rain continued its relentless assault, the wind howling like a tormented spirit. Finally, Kondo drew a deep breath, the sound ragged in the tense quiet. "Lead the way," he said, his voice grim. "This storm leaves me no other choice." He looked at me, a flicker of something that might have been apology in his eyes. "I know this is unorthodox, but my family—" His voice trailed off, the unspoken words hanging in the air like the scent of rain and fear. Yoshitsune nodded, a grim satisfaction on his face. He rose to his feet, moving with a sudden, decisive energy. "We leave as soon as the tide turns. It will be dangerous, but—" He paused, meeting my gaze. "We will survive this. We have to." I swallowed, my throat dry. Survival. It seemed like such a fragile thing in this moment, a flickering candle flame in the heart of a storm. But Yoshitsune's words, despite the grimness of the situation, sparked a small ember of hope within me. Maybe, just maybe, we could pull this off. Maybe we could navigate the treacherous currents, outwit the pirates, and escape this flooded city. Maybe we could live to see another sunrise. I looked out at the raging storm, at the relentless rain that showed no sign of stopping. Pirates, smugglers, a hidden cove. It was a desperate gamble. But as Kondo had said, it was our only choice. As darkness fell, swallowing the last vestiges of daylight, Kondo, Yoshitsune, and Takahiro prepared to leave the relative safety of the dilapidated tea house. The wind howled like a tormented spirit, rattling the flimsy wooden shutters and threatening to tear them from their hinges. Rain lashed against the building, a relentless barrage that seemed determined to penetrate every crack and crevice. I watched them, a strange mixture of admiration and bewilderment swirling within me. Part of me, a small, reckless sliver, whispered that I should join them, experience the raw power of the storm firsthand. The rest of me, the more sensible, self-preserving portion, screamed, "Stay inside! At least the roof hasn't collapsed yet." The three figures stepped out into the storm, the wind instantly whipping around them, a swirling vortex of rain and wind. Takahiro, the scholar, staggered, his precious scrolls nearly ripped from his grasp. He clutched them tighter, his knuckles white against the dark wood of the scroll case. I could almost feel the icy sting of the rain against my own skin, the relentless push of the wind. Ancient Japanese clothing often incorporated layers of silk or linen, providing warmth and some protection from the elements, I reminded myself. I hoped, for their sakes, that those layers were waterproof. "May the kami guide us," Tae whispered, her voice barely audible above the roar of the storm. Her eyes followed the three figures as they vanished into the rain-streaked darkness. She turned back to the small fire, her face illuminated by the flickering flames. I could sense the weight of her worry, the silent prayer for her family's safety echoing in the small room. She was thinking of them, out there somewhere, braving the storm's fury. Some ancient Japanese believed carrying a charm with a picture of a cat could protect you from storms, a quirky little fact that flitted across my mind. A cat charm. It sounded cute, I thought, but honestly, in this weather I'd prefer a life raft. Historians still argue whether these charms were effective or just fashionable. Fashionable in a life-or-death kind of way, I supposed. Kondo glanced back at the tea house, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. The warm glow spilling from the doorway must have looked inviting, a stark contrast to the brutal reality of the storm. He hesitated, his shoulders slumping slightly. I imagined him thinking of the warm sake he had left unfinished, the comfortable futon that awaited him should he choose to stay. Was this journey, this perilous trek into the heart of the storm, truly worth the risk? He was a samurai, though. Ancient Japanese samurai were trained to face danger and hardship without flinching. It was ingrained in them, a part of their code, their very being. Yoshitsune, sensing his companion's hesitation, placed a firm hand on Kondo's shoulder and pushed him forward. "There's no time to hesitate," he said, his voice sharp and clear cutting through the wind's howl. "The storm waits for no man." His words were a stark reminder of the urgency of their mission, the danger that lurked in every gust of wind, every flash of lightning. There was no turning back now. "May the kami protect us all," Takahiro murmured, his voice low and strained. He adjusted his grip on the scrolls, his face pale and drawn. He looked less like a seasoned traveler, and more like a frightened scholar caught in a nightmare. The wind buffeted him, threatening to tear him from his feet. He stumbled again, but Yoshitsune steadied him, an unspoken promise of support in the face of the storm's fury. They pressed on, 3 figures silhouetted against the raging tempest, their determination a flickering flame against the overwhelming darkness. The rain continued its relentless assault, blurring the world into a swirling canvas of gray and black. The wind roared in their ears, a constant reminder of the forces they were battling against. I watched until they disappeared completely, swallowed by the storm's embrace, leaving me alone in the relative safety of the tea house, with nothing but the howling wind and the drumming rain for company. The small fire crackled and popped, a fragile source of warmth and light in the encroaching darkness. Tae remained silent, her gaze fixed on the doorway, her thoughts lost in the storm. I couldn't help but wonder what awaited them out there, in the heart of the storm's eye. Would they find what they were searching for, or would they be consumed by the very forces they sought to defy? The questions hung heavy in the air, unanswered, lost in the roar of the wind and the relentless drumming of the rain. Time seemed to stretch on, each moment an eternity. The storm raged on, an unrelenting force of nature, a testament to the raw power of the world around them. And all I could do was wait, and hope. The wind howls like a banshee, driving rain into my face. I stumble through mud, clinging to Yoshitsune's arm for support. The lanterns have long since been extinguished, leaving the world shrouded in darkness. I think I've never been so wet in my life. Water streams down my face, blurring my vision. Every gust of wind feels like a slap, every step a precarious gamble in the slick, treacherous mire. The air is thick with the salty tang of the sea, mingling with the earthy scent of the sodden ground. I can barely see a hand in front of my face, and the only sounds are the roaring wind, the drumming rain, and the squelch of my boots in the mud. I'm starting to think swimming would be preferable. At least then I'd be moving in the right direction, instead of blindly lurching forward. You probably won't survive this unless you can learn to see in the dark. Just saying. Kondo shivers beside me, his teeth chattering a rhythmic counterpoint to the wind's howl. By the gods, he mutters, his voice barely audible above the storm. The cold. It's seeping into my bones. He hunches his shoulders, trying to draw warmth from within, a futile effort against the relentless onslaught of the rain. Takahiro, ever the scholar, clutches his precious scroll case close to his chest, his face etched with worry. I pray the contents haven't been ruined, he says, his voice strained with anxiety. He shifts the case slightly, as if trying to assess the damage through layers of silk and bamboo. Historians still argue about the best way to dry waterlogged scrolls. I suggest a hair dryer, though that hasn't been invented yet. It might involve rice, I vaguely recall, or perhaps carefully layering the damp sheets between absorbent cloths. Certainly not a roaring fire, that much I know. We're almost there, Yoshitsune calls back to us, his voice remarkably clear and strong despite the wind. He sounds unfazed by the tempest, his movements fluid and confident even in this treacherous terrain. He seems to possess some uncanny sixth sense that allows him to navigate through the darkness with ease. Kondo groans, a sound of pure misery. I offer him a sympathetic pat on the shoulder, though it's likely more dampening than comforting. Takahiro murmurs something about the importance of preserving historical records, his words lost to the wind. Yoshitsune leads us through a maze of narrow alleys, his steps sure and swift. He weaves between crumbling buildings, ducks under low-hanging eaves, and navigates the slick cobblestone paths with an almost preternatural grace. He certainly knows his way around these back streets. It's a far cry from the grand halls of the Imperial Palace, a world of shadows and secrets. The alleyways grow progressively narrower, the buildings closing in around us like grasping claws. The air grows thick with the smell of salt and fish, and the faint lingering aroma of something exotic. Spices, perhaps? Something not typically found in these parts. He glances back at us occasionally, a fleeting glimpse of his profile in the darkness, making sure we're keeping up. It strikes me that he seems strangely at home in this hidden world, a world removed from the rigid formality of court life. A world, perhaps, where the lines between right and wrong are a little more blurred, I remember hearing whispers about smuggling operations in these coastal towns, the clandestine trade of silks, spices, and other illicit goods. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, we emerge from the labyrinthine alleys into a small, hidden cove. The wind still howls, but its fury is somewhat muted by the high, rocky walls that surround us. Overhanging trees shroud the entrance, their branches dripping with rain, creating a curtain of water that obscures the view from the outside. A small boat bobs gently in the water, its outline barely visible in the darkness. It looks fragile against the backdrop of the churning sea, a mere speck tossed about by the elements. But it's our only hope. A figure emerges from the shadows, his form obscured by the darkness. He approaches cautiously, peering at us through the driving rain. "Yoshitsune-san," he calls out, his voice hoarse. "I wasn't expecting you in such weather." He sounds surprised, perhaps even a little apprehensive. He squints at us, trying to make out our faces in the gloom. He's a wiry man, dressed in simple, rough-spun clothing. He seems weathered and worn, like the cliffs surrounding the cove. "Smugglers? Pirates? Is this rescue mission turning into an international incident? I hope my passport is up to date." I swallow nervously, the implications of this clandestine meeting suddenly dawning on me. We're not just escaping the city, we're entering a world of shadows, a world where laws are bent and broken, a world where trust is a commodity more valuable than gold. I glance at Yoshitsune, trying to gauge his reaction, but his face is impassive, giving nothing away. He simply nods in greeting to the man, a silent acknowledgement of their shared secret. The man gestures towards the waiting boat. "Come," he says, his voice low and urgent. "We must leave quickly. The storm is worsening." He casts a nervous glance towards the open sea, his eyes scanning the darkness. The small boat rocks precariously in the churning water, a fragile vessel against the might of the storm. This is it, then, our escape, our leap into the unknown. I take a deep breath, steeling myself against the fear that threatens to overwhelm me. I follow Yoshitsune towards the boat, my heart pounding in my chest. The wind and rain a constant reminder of the perilous journey that lies ahead. The man holds the boat steady as we clamber aboard, the flimsy craft dipping dangerously low in the water. As we push off from the shore, the cove disappears behind us, swallowed by the darkness. We're alone now, adrift in the storm, our fate entrusted to the whims of the wind and waves, and the secrets of Yoshitsune's shadowy allies. They climbed into the boat, settling onto the damp wooden thwarts. The rough, splintered wood dug into their hakama, a small discomfort overshadowed by the larger anxieties churning within them. The smuggler, a wiry man with a face like weathered driftwood, pushed off from the shore, the small craft slicing through the choppy water. The rain continued to fall, a relentless drumming against the wooden hull, but here in the cove, sheltered from the worst of the wind, the world felt strangely calm, hushed, as if holding its breath. The rhythmic splash of the oars was the only sound, a steady heartbeat in the stillness. Kondo looked back at the shore, the rocky beach already fading into the gray mist. The flickering lights of the village, his village, were swallowed by the gloom. A mix of hope and fear warred in his eyes, two conflicting currents swirling in their depths. Would he reach his family in time? Would he see their faces, feel their embrace again? The uncertainty clawed at him, a gnawing beast in his gut. You hope so, unless you like sad endings. You remember reading somewhere that ancient Japanese boats often incorporated outrigger designs for stability in rough seas. You glance at their current vessel. No outriggers, just a small, open boat, bravely or foolishly, battling the waves. You find yourself silently cheering for the little boat, for Kondo, for a happy resolution to this tense escape. You also recall another quirky fact. Some ancient Japanese sailors chewed special herbs believed to prevent seasickness. You glance at the smuggler, at Kondo, at Takahiro, all pale and grim-faced, but seemingly unaffected by the turbulent waters. Maybe they have their own secret stash of seasickness remedies. Or maybe they're just too preoccupied with their current predicament to notice the churning of their stomachs. You think Dramamine would have been simpler, and probably more effective. Yoshitsune leaned forward, whispering something to the smuggler, his voice low and urgent, lost in the patter of the rain. The smuggler nodded, A curt, almost imperceptible movement, his gaze fixed on the horizon. What secrets are they sharing now? You feel a prickle of frustration. Another piece of the puzzle hidden from view. Another whispered conversation adding to the mystery. You think a little transparency would be nice, though you try to trust the process. After all, you're just an observer here, a silent witness to their unfolding story. You've read enough about Yoshitsune to know that his life is shrouded in mystery. Historians still argue whether he was involved in various clandestine activities, whether he was a master manipulator pulling strings from the shadows, or if that's just part of his legend, the embellishments added over time, transforming the man into myth. You wonder where the truth lies, buried beneath layers of speculation and romanticized tales. Takahiro, his face etched with worry, studied the sky, his brow furrowed in concentration. The swirling clouds, dark and heavy with rain, offered no comfort, no glimpse of the stars he sought. He thinks of ancient texts, of astrological charts, of the fickle nature of fate, trying to decipher some hidden message in the celestial chaos. He remembers his grandfather, a renowned astrologer, teaching him the secrets of the heavens, pointing out the constellations, explaining their influence on human affairs. He wishes his grandfather were here now, to guide him, to offer some reassurance in these uncertain times. You recall that ancient Japanese astronomy was advanced, with scholars carefully tracking the movements of the stars and planets, meticulously recording their observations. You wonder what Takahiro sees, or doesn't see, in the storm-racked sky, what omens he's gleaning from the celestial tapestry. Kondo closed his eyes, his lips moving silently. He, whispering a prayer, a desperate plea to whatever gods might be listening. He thinks of his wife, her gentle smile, the way her hand fits perfectly in his. He thinks of his children, their laughter echoing in his memory, the warmth of their small bodies huddled against him on cold nights. He thinks of his little house by the sea, the smell of salt and wood smoke, the familiar creak of the floorboards beneath his feet. Will he see them again? Will he feel the warmth of his home, the comfort of his family's love? The question, unanswered, hangs heavy in the air, as thick and oppressive as the rain. Each splash of the oars against the waves, each gust of wind, each roll of the boat seemed to amplify his fear, his longing, his desperate hope. The journey felt endless, a slow, agonizing crawl across a vast, unforgiving sea. The rain continued to fall, a relentless reminder of the precariousness of their situation, of the thin line between hope and despair. As the boat nudged closer to the shore, the first gray fingers of dawn clawed their way across the sky, painting the clouds in hues of bruised purple and sickly green. Sunrise, more like apocalypse sunrise at this point. I silently hoped this chapter ended better than the last one, which had involved a near miss with a rather large and rather territorial giant squid. The coastline materialized from the mist, a jagged, broken line of dark rock against the pale sky. The waves crashed against the shore with a relentless, hungry roar, spitting foam and debris high into the air. The mist, thick and clinging, swirled around us, making it difficult to see clearly. But what I could see was enough. Wreckage. The splintered remains of houses, some still clinging precariously to the cliffs, others smashed against the rocks like discarded toys. Trees, uprooted and stripped bare, lay scattered across the landscape like fallen giants. Debris, a chaotic jumble of wood, thatch, and household items, bobbed in the turbulent waters. It looked like a giant, angry hand had swept across the land, leaving nothing but destruction in its wake. Beside me, Kondo's face paled. He gripped the side of the boat, his knuckles white. "My village," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. His eyes scanned the ravaged coastline, desperately seeking any sign of life, any flicker of familiarity amongst the devastation. I caught myself absently fingering the small, carved wooden turtle I carried in my pocket, a gift from Kondo before our journey began. He'd explained it was a charm against drowning. A nice thought, but personally, I thought a good quality life jacket would be considerably more effective. It made me think about all the things we think we know about the past, and how much of it is just stuffing. Like those debates about whether ancient Japanese fishermen used nets woven from seaweed. Environmentally sound, sure, but was it actually true? Historians seem to spend an inordinate amount of time arguing about things like that. I hoped his family had the foresight to seek higher ground. Kondo had told me stories of how his village, like many others along the coast, had designated evacuation routes for just such emergencies. Paths leading up into the hills, marked by ancient stones and known to every villager from childhood. It was a tradition born of hard experience, a testament to the unpredictable fury of the sea. The boat pitched violently as a larger wave slammed against its side, sending a spray of cold seawater across the deck. I steadied myself, grabbing onto the railing. Visibility was getting worse, the mist swirling thicker and faster, driven by the rising wind. We were close enough to shore now to hear the mournful cry of gulls circling overhead, their calls echoing eerily across the desolate landscape. It was a sound that spoke of loss, of emptiness. A sound that mirrored the hollowness in my own chest. Suddenly, a shout broke through the gloom. Yoshitsune, perched precariously on the bow of the boat, pointed towards a cluster of figures huddled on a rocky outcrop, just visible through the swirling mist. "There!" he called, his voice strained with excitement. "Survivors!" Kondo's head snapped up, his eyes fixed on the distant figures. His breath caught in his throat, a flicker of hope igniting in his eyes. Could it be? Could his family be among them? He grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "Faster!" he urged, his voice hoarse. "We must reach them." The boatman, a grizzled old man with eyes that had seen too much of the sea's cruelty, nodded grimly and adjusted his course, maneuvering the vessel carefully through the treacherous waters towards the rocky outcrop. The waves buffeted the boat, threatening to capsize us, but the old man held firm, his weathered hands gripping the rudder with unwavering strength. As we drew closer, the figures on the outcrop became clearer, a small group huddled together against the wind and the spray, their faces pale and drawn. Women clutched children close, their bodies shielding them from the elements. Men stood guard, their eyes scanning the horizon, their faces etched with worry. Kondo's gaze swept over the group, searching, seeking. His breathing grew shallow, his body tense with anticipation. Then, a gasp escaped his lips. A woman, her hair plastered to her face by the rain, detached herself from the group and stumbled towards the edge of the outcrop. She raised a hand, waving frantically, a gesture of desperation, of hope. Kondo recognized her instantly. His wife. Relief washed over him, so profound it almost brought him to his knees. He called out her name, his voice cracking with emotion, a sound that was swallowed by the roar of the wind and the waves. But she heard him. She saw him. And in that moment, amidst the devastation, amidst the despair, a spark of hope flickered to life. A spark that promised reunion, that whispered of survival. A spark that, for a brief moment, banished the shadows that clung to the coastline. The boat crunched against the rocky outcrop, sending a spray of seawater into the air. Kondo scrambled ashore, his legs shaky with relief after the harrowing journey. He stumbled, almost falling, but caught himself on a jagged rock, his hands scraping against the rough surface. He ignored the sting, his eyes fixed on the small group of figures huddled near the meager shelter of a rocky overhang. "Hana! Kenji! Aiko!" he cried, his voice hoarse from the wind and rain. He pushed himself forward, half running, half stumbling across the uneven ground, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. "Please, let this be a happy reunion scene. I need a little emotional uplift after all that rain and near drowning." As he drew closer, the figures detached themselves from the shadows and rushed towards him. He saw his wife, Hana's, face, streaked with tears, her mouth open in a silent cry of relief. His two children, Kenji and Aiko, followed close behind, their small faces mirroring their mother's emotion. Kondo's heart overflowed. He reached them, and they collided in a tangle of limbs and tearful embraces. He held them tight, burying his face in Hana's hair, breathing in the familiar scent of wood smoke and something faintly floral that he always associated with her. He felt a wave of gratitude so profound it almost brought him to his knees. He was alive. They were alive. That was all that mattered. Takahiro and Yoshitsune watched the reunion from a respectful distance, their usual stoicism softened by the raw emotion of the scene. Even their normally impassive faces showed a flicker of something akin to sympathy, perhaps even a hint of shared relief. Some ancient Japanese believed hugging during reunions could ward off evil spirits, I mused. watching Kondo cling to his family. Personally, I think a warm blanket and a cup of tea would be more effective. The moment of joyful reunion, however, was tragically short-lived. A small figure emerged from the huddled group near the overhang. He was pale and trembling, his eyes wide with a terror that sent a chill through me even from this distance. It was Taro, Tay's younger brother. He stumbled towards Tae, his voice a thin, reedy wail. "Tae-san," he cried, his words barely audible above the wind. "Our village, it's gone. Everything is gone." Tae gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The blood drained from her face, leaving her as pale as her brother. She rushed towards him, her eyes mirroring his terror. What do you mean?" she stammered, her voice choked with fear. What about our parents?" Kondo, still holding his children close, turned towards the sound of Taro's voice, his own joy turning to ashes in his chest. The look on Taken's face told him everything he needed to know. The storm, which had spared them at sea, had taken its toll on land. Taro clung to Tae, sobbing uncontrollably. "The river, it burst its banks," he choked out between sobs. "The houses, the fields, everything swept away. I tried to find them, Oka-san, Odo-san, but..." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Tay's knees buckled, and she would have fallen if Kondo hadn't rushed forward to catch her. He held her close, his own heart heavy with grief for her loss. His children, sensing the shift in mood, clung to him tighter, their small faces etched with confusion and fear. "The storm. It was so strong," Taro continued, his voice trembling. "The wind, the rain. I've never seen anything like it. The houses, they were like toys, just swept away. I climbed a tree. That's how I survived." He shuddered, his body racked with sobs. Ancient Japanese villages were often built from wood and other natural materials. Asterisk, I thought grimly, Summonin making them vulnerable to destruction from storms and floods. This wasn't just a tragic story. It was a stark reminder of the precariousness of life in this era. Kondo looked out at the churning gray sea, the waves still crashing against the rocks. He had been so focused on his own survival, on getting back to his family, that he hadn't considered the devastation the storm might have wrought elsewhere. He had escaped the fury of the sea, only to be met by the wreckage it had left behind on land. The relief he had felt only moments before was now replaced by a heavy sense of dread and sorrow. He looked down at Tae, her face buried in his shoulder, her body shaking with grief. He tightened his arms around her, offering what little comfort he could. He had found his family, but the storm had taken something precious from them, something he could never replace. The joy of reunion had been swiftly and cruelly overshadowed by the bitter taste of ruin. The wind howled around them, a mournful soundtrack to their grief. The gray sky wept a cold, relentless rain. The outcrop, their temporary refuge, felt less like a haven, and more like a lonely island in a sea of loss. What would they do now? Where would they go? The questions hung heavy in the air, unanswered, like the storm clouds that still clung to the horizon. Their journey, it seemed, was far from over. As the storm clouds began to clear, revealing a pale blue sky, the survivors began to assess the damage. Cleanup time? Always fun after a near apocalypse. I hoped they had good insurance. Ancient Japanese communities often practiced mutual aid, with neighbors helping each other rebuild after disasters, a practical necessity in a land prone to earthquakes and typhoons. It made sense. Raising a house alone was a monumental task, but with many hands, even the heaviest beams could be lifted, the most stubborn debris cleared. I saw Kondo helping his neighbors clear debris, his face grim but determined. He hefted a massive, waterlogged beam, muscles straining, and moved it to the growing pile of salvaged wood. Tae comforted her brother, whispering words of encouragement, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She pointed towards a section of collapsed roof, suggesting a way to dismantle it safely. Some ancient Japanese believed rebuilding houses with wood salvaged from shipwrecks brought good luck. Personally, I thought a good carpenter would be more practical. Shipwreck wood, while readily available after a storm, was likely to be waterlogged and riddled with salt, weakening its structural integrity. Historians still argue whether these recycled materials were actually used, or if that's just a modern eco-conscious fable, a romanticized notion of resourcefulness. The truth, as always, likely lay somewhere in between. "We will rebuild," Kondo said, his voice firm, echoing the quiet determination in his eyes. "The kami will guide us." Shinto beliefs emphasize the importance of resilience and rebuilding after hardship. Disasters were seen not as punishments, but as natural occurrences, disruptions in the harmony of the world. Rebuilding, then, was not merely a practical act, but a spiritual one, a reaffirmation of life and community in the face of adversity. The kami, the spirits that inhabited the natural world, were believed to offer support and guidance in times of need. Kondo's words were a prayer, a declaration of faith, a rallying cry for his community. Takahiro unrolled a scroll, its ink miraculously intact, protected by the oiled silk wrapping. He began to read, his voice a calming murmur in the ravaged landscape, a beacon of hope amidst the devastation. The words were ancient, drawn from texts passed down through generations, detailing architectural principles, construction techniques, rituals of blessing and purification. He thought of ancient texts, of stories of resilience, of the cyclical nature of destruction and renewal. Destruction was inevitable, a part of the natural order, but so too was renewal. The cycle of life and death, creation and destruction, was woven into the fabric of the universe. I hoped his scrolls included instructions for building a better house, perhaps incorporating stronger foundations, better drainage systems, or even a second story for refuge in future floods. Learning from past disasters was key to ensuring future resilience. Yoshitsune watched them, a strange expression on his face. A flicker of admiration, perhaps, for their unwavering spirit, their commitment to rebuilding, but also a hint of melancholy, a touch of wistful detachment. He thought of his own uncertain future, of the wandering life of a Ronin, of the fragile nature of peace. He was a warrior without a master, a man adrift in a world in constant flux. He had known violence and loss, had witnessed the ephemeral nature of peace firsthand. Would he stay and help, contribute his skills and strength to the rebuilding effort, or would he vanish into the shadows, continuing his solitary journey? I wondered if he'll stay and help, or vanish into the shadows. His presence was unsettling, a reminder of the turbulent times they lived in, the ever-present threat of conflict. Yet, he was also a skilled warrior, a potential ally in a world where danger lurked around every corner. The sun, now fully emerged from behind the retreating storm clouds, cast a warm glow on the ravaged landscape. The air, still heavy with the scent of rain and salt, carried the sounds of labor, the rhythmic thud of hammers, the creak of salvaged timbers. The task ahead was daunting, the scale of destruction immense, yet the survivors worked with a quiet determination, their faces etched with a mixture of grief and hope. The storm had tested their resilience, their faith, their very will to survive, but it had also revealed their strength, their unity, their unwavering belief in the possibility of renewal. They were rebuilding not just their homes and their village, but their lives, their hopes, their future. And as they worked, they were unconsciously weaving a new narrative, a story of resilience and rebirth, a testament to the enduring spirit of the human heart. In the weeks that follow, the survivors begin the long and arduous process of rebuilding. You hope they have good contractors. Unless you enjoy watching paint dry, dust hangs heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the devastation. The rhythmic clang of hammers, the scrape of shovels, and the low murmur of voices become the soundtrack of their days. Homes, once vibrant and full of life, are reduced to skeletal frames. Slowly, painstakingly, they begin to rise again, piece by piece. The scent of fresh-cut timber mingles with the lingering smell of smoke, a bittersweet aroma of renewal. Kondo works tirelessly, his hands calloused but his spirit unbroken. He hauls timber, mixes mortar, and directs the rebuilding efforts with a quiet authority. His movements are precise, efficient, born of years spent working the land. The lines on his face have deepened, etched by worry and exhaustion, but his eyes hold a steady flame of determination. TAE helps organize the distribution of food and supplies, her face showing the strain of hardship. She moves through the makeshift camp, a calming presence amidst the chaos. She listens patiently to concerns, offers words of encouragement, and ensures that everyone has what they need to survive. She remembers stories her grandmother told her of ancient times, of how communities pulled together in the face of adversity, of how hard work and perseverance were valued above all else. It is this spirit, this deep-rooted cultural memory, that fuels her tireless efforts. You see Takahiro teaching the children, his voice a gentle murmur against the backdrop of reconstruction. He gathers them beneath the shade of a surviving tree, using charcoal to draw characters on scraps of wood. He tells them stories of brave heroes and wise scholars, reminding them of the importance of knowledge, of the power of stories to heal and inspire. He thinks of ancient texts, filled with wisdom passed down through generations. He remembers a peculiar superstition that teaching children calligraphy during rebuilding brought good luck. He smiles wryly to himself. He thinks basic carpentry would be more helpful. Still, he continues his lessons, believing that nurturing their minds is as important as rebuilding their homes. He sees a spark of hope in their eyes, a flicker of resilience that mirrors the spirit of the entire village. Yoshitsune has vanished, leaving no trace except rumors. Some say he headed north, seeking solitude in the mountains. Others claim he joined a band of wandering monks, seeking enlightenment. Still others whisper that he sailed across the sea, seeking adventure in distant lands. Historians still argue whether he continued his wandering life or found a new purpose. His fate, like so many others lost to the storm, remains shrouded in mystery. He becomes a whispered legend, a symbol of both resilience and the transient nature of life. As the village slowly begins to take shape again, a new energy emerges. People are working together, their shared hardship forging a stronger sense of community. Neighbors help neighbors, sharing tools, food, and stories. Children play amongst the rubble, their laughter a testament to the enduring human spirit. You think maybe hardship isn't so bad after all, unless you enjoy comfort and convenience. The rebuilding process is slow, arduous, and filled with setbacks, but it is also a testament to the power of human resilience. The shared experience of loss and the collective effort to rebuild has created a bond stronger than anything they had known before. The storm has changed us, Tae murmurs, watching the villagers work. She stands beside Kondo, surveying the progress they have made. The setting sun casts long shadows across the newly erected frames of homes. She sees not just rebuilding but a transformation. It has shown us what truly matters. She remembers the stories her grandmother told, of how ancient Japanese society valued community and mutual support, especially during times of hardship. These stories, once just tales of the past, now resonate with a newfound depth and meaning. The storm has stripped away the superficial, revealing the core values that bind them together. Kondo nods, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He sees the faint outline of the mountains, a symbol of strength and permanence against the ever-changing sky. He thinks of his family, of their resilience, of the uncertain future. He knows the rebuilding is just the beginning. There will be challenges ahead, new hardships to overcome. But he also sees a strength in his people, a unity forged in the crucible of disaster. The winds of change, he whispers, blow strongest after the storm. He believes that from the ruins of the old, something new and stronger will emerge. The storm has cleared the way, not just for physical rebuilding, but for a renewal of spirit, a rediscovery of what truly matters. The future remains uncertain, but in the shared strength of his community he finds a glimmer of hope. As the village slowly began to rise from the ashes, a transformation took place in Takahiro. He became increasingly fascinated by the region's history, spending every spare moment immersed in research. You watched him, a mixture of amusement and exasperation swirling within you. You hoped his research included instructions for building a better roof, unless you liked leaks. A lot. He'd disappear for hours, returning dust-covered from the village archives, a pile of ancient scrolls clutched in his arms. He'd spread them out on the cleanest surface he could find, meticulously studying faded maps and painstakingly deciphering the elegant calligraphy. He'd interview the oldest villagers, listening with rapt attention to their stories of generations past, tales of prosperity and hardship, of traditions and forgotten lore. You think maybe he should be helping with the actual rebuilding, hauling timber, clearing rubble, that sort of thing. But you couldn't deny the spark of intellectual curiosity that lit up his face when he stumbled upon a particularly intriguing passage. Ancient Japanese scholarship often did encompass the study of local history and folklore, so at least he was being authentic, if not entirely practical. He even started debating with himself about the materials ancient maps were made of. Were they really drawn on silk? Or was that just a luxurious assumption on the part of modern historians? One afternoon, you found him hunched over a particularly brittle scroll, his brow furrowed in concentration. Historians, he'd informed you earlier, still argue about that silk thing. You'd nodded politely, trying to suppress the urge to remind him that the roof still needed patching. He looked up as you approached, a flicker of excitement in his eyes, a glint you hadn't seen since before the fire. A hidden secret, perhaps. You knew his type, always chasing after the whisper of a legend. "It seems," he began, his voice hushed with anticipation, "that centuries ago, this village wasn't just a small fishing community. It was a thriving port. Its ships sailed to distant lands, trading goods and exchanging knowledge." He gestured at the scroll, tracing a faded line with his finger. "Ancient Japanese seafaring and trade were extensive," you recalled from some dusty history book. "Their ships sailed to Korea, China, and even beyond." Maybe there was something to this after all. "There might be a way," Takahiro murmured, unrolling another scroll, this one even more fragile than the last. "A forgotten path leading to a hidden harbor." He pointed to a series of intricate symbols. You vaguely remembered reading somewhere that some ancient Japanese believed certain harbors were protected by magical sea turtles. You thought a good lighthouse, or maybe even just a decent lantern, would be more practical. You stared at the scroll, then back at Takahiro, your mind buzzing. Hidden harbors? Forgotten paths? Is this village about to become the next Atlantis? He seemed oblivious to your mounting apprehension. He was lost in his own world, a world of ancient mariners and secret routes, of forgotten glory waiting to be rediscovered. You thought, with a sigh, that maybe his scroll should include directions for building a better boat, just in case. Kondo and TAE, drawn by Takahiro's hushed pronouncements, joined you. They peered over his shoulder, their faces etched with a mixture of curiosity and hope. Takahiro explained his findings, tracing the lines of the ancient map, his voice ringing with a newfound conviction. He spoke of the village's forgotten past, of its potential for renewed prosperity. He described the hidden harbor, sheltered from storms, and accessible only through a secret channel, a path known only to a select few. Kondo, ever the pragmatist, listened intently, his keen eyes scanning the scrolls. He asked questions about the feasibility of reopening the harbor, about the potential challenges and the resources required. TAE, her spirit still wounded from the fire, listened with a quiet intensity, her own hopes rekindled by Takahiro's discovery. Could this be the answer? Could this forgotten harbor, this secret path, be the key to the village's renewal? The air crackled with a sense of possibility, a shared yearning for a brighter future. The fire had taken so much, but perhaps, just perhaps, it had also unearthed something precious, something forgotten, something capable of breathing new life into their devastated community. The path ahead was uncertain, shrouded in the mists of time and legend, but for the first time since the disaster, a glimmer of hope shone through the darkness. Kondo gripped the helm, the rough wood familiar beneath his calloused hands. Takahiro's map, brittle with age, lay spread out on a small, flat surface beside him, its intricate lines and symbols a testament to a forgotten era. He squinted at the faded ink, tracing the route with a calloused finger, hoping his navigation skills, honed over years of fishing these treacherous waters, were up to par. Unless, of course, I enjoyed being lost at sea. Which I most certainly did not. The small boat pitched and rolled, the sea still choppy from the recent storm. Whitecaps danced across the surface, reflecting the overcast sky. The wind whipped at the distinctive sail, billowing it out like a bird's wing. It was a design peculiar to this region, adapted to the local wind conditions, a testament to the ingenuity of ancient Japanese boat builders. Still, I couldn't help but think a good motor wouldn't hurt. Too bad they hadn't been invented yet. The scholar's words echoed in his mind. Look for the 3 rocks shaped like cranes. Kondo scanned the coastline, his eyes searching for the telltale shapes. He remembered seeing carvings of cranes on older fishing boats, symbols of good luck, according to some ancient sailors. Personally, I thought a good compass would be more helpful. Then again, even compasses were a matter of debate in these times. Historians still argued whether ancient Japanese compasses actually included needles made from lodestone, or if that's just a magnetically charged assumption. Rocks shaped like cranes? Is this treasure hunt turning into an ornithological expedition? My own sense of direction was spinning like a compass in a hurricane. I tried to stay patient, reminding myself that Kondo's success was crucial to the village's survival. We needed that harbor, that freshwater source. We needed it desperately. He continued to sail, the coastline a blur of green and gray. The wind howled in his ears, the salt spray stinging his face. Doubt began to gnaw at him. Had he misinterpreted the map? Were the crane rocks just a fanciful legend? Had he led himself, and by extension the entire village, on a fool's errand? Then, suddenly, he saw them. 3 rocks, rising from the turbulent water like ancient sentinels. Their shapes, weathered and eroded by centuries of wind and waves, uncannily resembled cranes. Their long necks stretched towards the sky, their wings slightly outstretched. It was as if they had been sculpted by the gods themselves. Kondo's heart pounded with anticipation. He adjusted the sail, steering the boat towards the rocks, his eyes fixed on their distinctive silhouettes. Ancient Japanese cartography often employed symbolic representations, landmarks depicted as stylized images rather than precise geographical locations. Takahiro's map was no exception. The crane rocks, I realized, were more than just geological formations. They were a key, unlocking the secret of the forgotten harbor. He rounded the largest of the crane rocks, the boat rocking precariously in the churning water. He held his breath, expecting to see nothing but open sea. But then, as the boat cleared the last rock, a breathtaking vista unfolded before him. There it was, a sheltered harbor, nestled between towering cliffs, its entrance completely hidden from view until this precise moment. The water within the harbor was calm and still, a stark contrast to the turbulent sea outside. A small stream flowed into the harbor from the land, its water clear and sparkling, a lifeline in this parched land. Kondo's eyes widened with wonder. He had found it. The forgotten harbor, a sanctuary from the storms, a source of fresh water, a potential lifeline for his struggling village. This wasn't just a harbor. It was a haven. This could be the answer to the village's prayers, the answer to our prayers. He lowered the sail, letting the boat drift into the tranquil waters of the harbor. The silence, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the hull, was a welcome reprieve from the roar of the open sea. He closed his eyes for a moment, savoring the peace, the sense of accomplishment, the hope that bloomed in his chest. He had done it. He had found the forgotten harbor, and with it, perhaps, the chance for a new beginning. The cranes, I thought, had indeed brought him luck. Or maybe, just maybe, it was good old-fashioned seamanship and a touch of desperate hope. Whatever the reason, we were here, and that was all that mattered. Now, the real work could begin. News of the harbor's discovery spread through the village like wildfire. Good news travels fast, unless it's news about a bigger typhoon brewing. The initial stunned silence that followed the receding floodwaters had given way to a buzz of excited chatter, a ripple that quickly became a roar. Children raced through the streets, their cries echoing the joyous news, while adults gathered in small groups, their faces etched with a mixture of disbelief and burgeoning hope. The harbor, once choked with debris and swallowed by the sea, now offered a glimmer of salvation. The villagers, their spirits renewed, began to clear the harbor entrance, their shared purpose forging a stronger bond. Ancient Japanese communities, I'd read somewhere, valued cooperation and mutual support during rebuilding efforts. It wasn't just about restoring physical structures. It was about restoring the spirit of the community. Men and women worked side by side, their hands raw and blistered, hauling away driftwood and rocks, their movements synchronized by a shared determination. The rhythmic clang of metal against stone, the grunts of exertion, the quiet murmurs of encouragement, these became the soundtrack of their resurrection. The shared hardship, the common goal, seemed to melt away old grievances, knitting them together with threads of resilience. I watched Tae as she moved amongst the workers, directing their efforts, her voice firm but gentle. Her face, usually so bright and cheerful, now showed the strain of leadership, the weight of responsibility pressing down on her slender shoulders. But even amidst the fatigue, I could see a flicker of hope in her eyes, a spark that ignited the same flame in those around her. Some ancient Japanese, according to certain texts, believed that building a new harbor required a special ceremony involving the sacrifice of a white rooster. Personally, I think a good engineer would be more effective. Historians still argue whether these ceremonies actually happened or if they're just colorful embellishments. TAE, thankfully, seemed to favor practical solutions over ritualistic sacrifices. Kondo, his sleeves rolled up, his muscular arms tanned from the sun, oversaw the construction of new boats, adapting designs from Takahiro's ancient scrolls. The old scholar's treasured collection, miraculously salvaged from the flood, had become their blueprint for the future. I watched Kondo as he studied the diagrams, his brow furrowed with concentration, tracing the intricate lines with a calloused finger. He wasn't just building boats, he was building hope. He thought of his family, their faces etched with worry and uncertainty, and his heart swelled with a fierce determination. He thought of their future, of the promise of a new beginning, and his hands moved with renewed purpose. Ancient Japanese boat-building techniques were incredibly advanced, I knew, with skilled craftsmen using specialized tools and techniques that had been honed over generations. Kondo, with Takahiro's scrolls as his guide, was breathing life back into these ancient traditions, shaping the wood with a reverence that bordered on sacred. As the harbor slowly came to life, the village began to stir with a renewed energy. The rhythmic clang of hammers against wood gradually gave way to the creak of new masts, the rustle of sails catching the wind. The first tentative voyages to nearby ports were met with cautious optimism, followed by a surge of relief and then jubilation, as trade routes were re-established. Goods began to flow in and out of the village once more, bringing with them not only sustenance, but also a sense of normalcy, a feeling that life, after the devastation, could indeed go on. I watched the ships sail in and out of the harbor, their white sails billowing against the azure sky, and I thought maybe, just maybe, this story will have a happy ending after all. Unless fate has other plans. One could never be too sure. The air thrummed with a new kind of activity, a blend of industry and anticipation. Fishermen mended their nets, their faces etched with the familiar lines of their trade, but now with a glint of optimism in their eyes. Merchants bustled about, their voices raised in the familiar cadence of bartering, haggling over prices with renewed vigor. Children, their laughter ringing through the air, chased each other along the newly repaired docks, their carefree joy a testament to the village's resilience. Even the elderly, their faces weathered by the storm, seemed to carry themselves with a renewed sense of purpose, their presence a reminder of the continuity of life, the enduring strength of the human spirit. Kondo stood at the edge of the harbor, watching the ships sail towards the horizon, their silhouettes shrinking against the vast expanse of the sea. He took a deep breath, the salty air filling his lungs, a tangible reminder of the lifeblood of their village. Beside him, TAE stood quietly, her gaze fixed on the departing vessels. "We have weathered the storm," Kondo said, his voice low but steady, his words echoing the sentiment that resonated through the entire village. "And we have emerged stronger." Ancient Japanese society, I'd learned, valued resilience and adaptability in the face of adversity. They saw hardship not as a defeat, but as an opportunity to rebuild, to learn, to grow stronger. Kondo's words were not just a statement of fact, they were an affirmation of their shared heritage, a testament to their indomitable spirit. TAE turned to him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "The winds of change," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle lapping of the waves. "Blow in our favor now." Her words were a prayer, a hope, a promise for a brighter future. The journey had been arduous, the losses profound, but the village had endured. They had faced the storm, and they had emerged, battered but not broken, ready to embrace the new beginning that lay before them. Years pass, and the village continues to prosper, its harbor a hub of trade and activity. You think, happy ending achieved, unless you enjoy sequels. Kondo, now a respected elder, watches his grandchildren play on the shore, his heart filled with contentment. TAE has become a community leader, her wisdom and compassion guiding the village's growth. You think a good education would be more practical. Takahiro has vanished again, leaving behind a library of scrolls and maps, a testament to his thirst for knowledge. You hope his library includes a good typhoon survival guide. Just in case. One day, a stranger arrives, a young samurai seeking his fortune. He carries a worn map, its markings faded but still legible. He asks for Kondo, his voice filled with respect. "I seek the wisdom of the pearl diver who weathered the great typhoon," the samurai says. "They say he knows the secrets of resilience." Kondo smiles, his eyes twinkling. He thinks of his family, of Tae, of Takahiro, of the storm that changed their lives. "The secrets of resilience?" he whispers. "They are written in the waves, in the wind, and in the hearts of those who rebuild." He gestures toward the bustling harbor, the children playing, the villagers working. "This," he says, "is our legacy." As you drift off to sleep, the image of that bustling harbor fills your mind. It's a reminder that even after the most devastating storms, even after the greatest losses, there is always the possibility of renewal, of rebuilding, and of creating a better future. The whispers of the typhoon have faded, replaced by the gentle murmur of waves, the soft rustle of leaves, and the quiet rhythm of your own breath. Sleep well, knowing that even in the darkest of nights, there is always the promise of a new dawn. And remember, if you ever find yourself caught in a typhoon, maybe chew on some herbs. Or better yet, find a really sturdy table. Sweet dreams.